In the summer of 1944, deep inside Nazi Germany, a German test pilot climbed into the cockpit of an American fighter the Luftwaffe was never supposed to touch. It wasn't a bomber. It wasn't damaged wreckage. It was a fully intact enemy aircraft, captured by pure accident. And what he was about to discover terrified German high command. The enemy in the hangar. August 1944. Luftwaffe Test Center Süd, hidden in the Bavarian Alps. Major Karl Neumann paused in front of Hangar 12, the smell of oil and burned metal still lingering in the air. Allied bombers had hit the region twice that week, yet this hangar remained untouched, for one reason only. Inside was something too valuable to lose. Under dim lights and patched roof panels stood an aircraft no German pilot had ever flown. Its shape was aggressive, almost unnatural. A massive engine, a long, brutal nose, wings bent downward like claws ready to strike. An American F4U Corsair, paint chipped, naval markings scratched out, but unmistakable. Neumann had tested captured Spitfires, Thunderbolts, even a Lightning once. None of them unsettled him like this machine. This aircraft had earned its reputation thousands of miles away over the Pacific. Japanese pilots called it the Screaming Devil. Not because it was fast, but because once it dived, escape was impossible. German intelligence had almost nothing on it. No combat reports, no pilot accounts, only fragments intercepted from Japanese transmissions, all describing the same thing. If you hear it, you're already dead. How the Corsair was captured, reimagined, 3 weeks earlier. North Atlantic, storm conditions, low visibility. Sub-Lieutenant James Carter, Royal Navy, was flying a long-range reconnaissance patrol from an escort carrier operating near Iceland. His Corsair had been newly assigned, barely broken in. Halfway through the mission, oil pressure collapsed. The engine began to choke. Carter knew he wouldn't make it back to the carrier. Ditching in those seas meant death. He turned east, hoping for land. Any land. Through the fog, he saw it. A narrow stretch of rocky coastline. German-occupied Denmark. He brought the Corsair down hard on a coastal meadow, snapping the propeller and collapsing one landing strut. The aircraft slid, stopped, intact. Carter destroyed the radio, smashed instruments, and reached for his flare gun. Too late. German coastal troops surrounded the wreck within minutes. For the Wehrmacht officer on site, it was like finding a winning lottery ticket on the battlefield. An American naval fighter, almost undamaged, and completely unknown to the Luftwaffe. The race to Germany. The Corsair couldn't fly. The engine damage required parts Germany didn't possess. Air transport was impossible. Rail dismantling would take weeks. So Berlin approved a risky solution. The aircraft was hidden, crated, and loaded onto a coastal freighter under cover of night. Allied submarines prowled the area. One torpedo, and the secret was gone forever. But luck, for once, favored Germany. After nearly 3 weeks at sea and rail transport through bomb-scarred territory, the Corsair arrived in southern Germany. Salt-stained, scarred, but repairable. When Major Neumann first saw it under hangar lights, he understood immediately. This wasn't just another Allied fighter. This was a weapon designed to hunt. And now, Germany was about to learn how it worked. End of Part 1. Cliffhanger. Neumann circled the aircraft slowly. He ran his hand along the bent wings, studied the massive propeller, measured the cockpit visibility. Then he read the final order stamped in red ink. Test immediately. Full performance evaluation authorized. No simulators, no manuals, no safety guarantees. Just a German pilot, inside an American killing machine, at a moment when the Reich could no longer afford mistakes. What he would discover in the air shocked even him. The first flight. What made the aircraft dangerous wasn't its shape. It was the logic behind it. The strange bent wings were not a design mistake. They were a solution. By lowering the wings, the engineers allowed for shorter, reinforced landing gear while keeping massive propeller clearance. Stronger gear meant carrier landings. Stronger landings meant survivability. The cockpit, raised higher than earlier models, gave the pilot something German fighters rarely offered: forward awareness. Visibility was no longer a luxury, it was a weapon. And then there was the armament. 6 wing-mounted heavy machine guns, hundreds of rounds per gun. A single burst could shred aluminum like paper. On paper, it was impressive. In the air, it would be terrifying. Test day, August 11, 1944, dawn over southern Germany. The weather couldn't have been better. Clear sky, calm air, no contrails above. Captain Erich Volkmann, Luftwaffe experimental pilot, arrived at the airfield before sunrise. He had slept little, not from fear, from anticipation. The ground crew stood silent beside the aircraft. Fuel topped off. Oil pressure checked twice. Control surfaces free. No one spoke. Volkmann climbed into the cockpit. Immediately he felt it. This aircraft wasn't built around compromises like German fighters. The seating position was higher, commanding. The long nose stretched forward like a loaded spear, yet visibility was better than expected. The controls felt deliberate. The instrument layout made sense. No guessing, no clutter. He engaged the starter. The engine detonated into life. The Pratt & Whitney radial didn't scream. It thundered. The entire airframe trembled, not violently, but with contained aggression. This was not a machine asking permission to fly. It was demanding it. Takeoff taxiing was immediately problematic. The nose blocked everything ahead. Volkmann weaved left, then right, copying techniques learned from Allied pilot interrogations. This aircraft expected its pilot to work with it, not against it. At the runway threshold, he paused, then pushed the throttle forward. The response was brutal. The aircraft surged ahead like it had been kicked. The tail lifted almost instantly. Acceleration pinned him into the seat. At flying speed, he pulled back gently. The Corsair leapt into the sky, not climbed, not rose, leapt, handling. At altitude, Volkmann began systematic testing, turns first, left, right. The aircraft responded smoothly, but with weight. This was not a nimble knife fighter. The controls demanded commitment. Below certain speeds, the wings felt heavy. That confirmed foreign intelligence reports. This aircraft did not want to dance, it wanted to strike. Speed. He advanced the throttle fully. The airspeed needle began climbing, steadily, relentlessly. 300 knots, 350, 400. The aircraft showed no stress. At speeds where German fighters began to vibrate and complain, the Corsair remained stable. Volkmann eased back the power only after crossing a threshold no frontline Luftwaffe fighter could reach. Speed alone would have made it dangerous, but that wasn't the real discovery. The vertical test. He climbed higher, 6,000 meters. Then he pulled up sharply. A pure energy climb. No tricks, no dive assist. The aircraft surged upward. Altitude unwound rapidly. 7,000, 8. Only then did the nose begin to fall. A stunning energy reserve. Next, he tried again, this time from a dive. He rolled inverted and pushed the nose down. The airspeed exploded. Wind screamed across the canopy. At peak velocity, he pulled back hard. The G-forces slammed him downward. His vision narrowed. But the aircraft held. Upward again, higher than before. This was the moment Volkmann understood. This fighter was never meant to turn with its enemy. The trap in the sky. The realization came quietly. No alarm, no sudden panic. Just a cold calculation forming in the pilot's mind. The aircraft beneath him wasn't merely faster, it changed the rules of the fight. Colonel Friedrich Keller, Luftwaffe evaluation pilot, reduced power slightly as the Corsair leveled off. His thoughts raced faster than the airspeed indicator ever could. German fighters lived and died by horizontal combat. Turning battles, tight circles, bleeding speed to stay inside an enemy's turn. This machine rejected that philosophy entirely. If an American pilot flew it correctly, and they would, There would be no turning fight at all. A losing choice. At lower speeds, German aircraft still held an advantage. A Bf-109 or FW-190 could outturn this heavy naval fighter. But that advantage existed only on paper, because the Corsair never had to accept those terms. It could stay high, stay fast, strike once, then vanish upward. If German pilots tried to follow, they paid for it with altitude and energy they could never recover in time. If they didn't follow, the attackers simply reset. Either way, the outcome was the same. Gun test. Keller rolled the aircraft into a shallow dive. 30 degrees. He aligned the gun sight with a distant ground marker and pressed the trigger. The response surprised him. The aircraft barely flinched. The heavy airframe absorbed the recoil as if it wasn't there. The nose stayed steady. The sight picture remained clean. This was not brute force shooting. This was precision. German fighters carried heavier cannons, devastating on impact. But they shook the aircraft during firing. Accuracy suffered, especially in high-speed passes. Here, the Corsair offered something more dangerous. Sustained, controlled fire exactly where the pilot wanted it. In a diving attack, that meant death. The final simulation. Keller checked his fuel. Still well within limits. There was one test left. The one that mattered most. He climbed back toward the upper layers of the sky, letting the aircraft breathe in thin air. 7,000 meters, high enough to own the fight. In his mind, he built the scenario. American fighter above, German formation below, defensive break, attacker overshoots. What happens next? He rolled inverted. The nose dropped. The world rushed upward. Speed built violently. At the imagined firing point, he hauled back on the stick. The G-forces crushed him into the seat. His vision dimmed at the edges. The aircraft complained, but complied. Immediately, he transitioned into a climb. Maximum power, perfect climb speed. The engine roared like it was offended by gravity itself. Keller clicked his stopwatch. Numbers that killed hope. 5,000 meters. Barely over a minute. 6,000. Still climbing like an elevator. 7,000 meters reached far sooner than expected. He leveled off and exhaled slowly. Then he did the comparison in his head. Same maneuver, same profile, Germany's best fighter. The difference wasn't small. It was decisive. Minutes in the air were everything, and the Corsair owned them. The paradox. That's when Keller understood the trap. If you chase this aircraft downward, you wasted energy trying to catch something faster than you. By the time you abandoned the pursuit, you were low, slow, and exposed. If you didn't chase it, the enemy climbed freely and returned on their terms. There was no correct response, only bad ones. The unthinkable conclusion. The Corsair wasn't winning fights through superiority. It was winning by denying choices. It forced its enemy into mistakes without ever engaging directly. Keller turned toward the airfield, hands steady, mind heavy. This wasn't a machine designed to defeat German fighters. It was designed to make them irrelevant. End of Part 3. Cliffhanger. No way to win. There was no ignoring it. Every path led to the same outcome. Major Otto Weiss, Luftwaffe evaluation pilot, had seen this pattern before, not in the west, but far to the east. Over the endless plains, Soviet pilots flying American-built fighters had learned a dangerous truth. You didn't need to be better in a turn. You just needed to control when the fight happened. The Corsair took that principle and perfected it. The difference was scale. What had once been a narrow advantage was now overwhelming. Turning the tables, Weiss set up the final defensive scenario. This time, the Corsair was the prey. A German fighter diving from above. Surprise attack, perfect position. He snapped into a hard brake turn, pulling maximum G to force an overshoot. The aircraft resisted him. The controls felt heavy. The turn rate was unimpressive. Against a FW-190, this maneuver would buy only seconds. In a real fight, cannon fire would already be cutting through the air. But then Weiss did something no German pilot would expect. He stopped turning. He leveled the wings. and unleashed the engine. Escape by speed. The aircraft surged forward. Acceleration erased distance faster than turning ever could. The speed needle climbed mercilessly. 300, 350, 400. Within moments, the imagined attacker was no longer a threat. Weiss checked the time. Barely a quarter of a minute from danger to dominance. For a pursuing German pilot, that meant one thing: a brief firing window, then nothing. Try to follow, and the Corsair would climb away, break off, and it would return from above. Either choice ended badly. Why it couldn't be killed, that was the secret. The Corsair didn't survive by outmaneuvering enemies. It survived by refusing to be caught. A disciplined pilot never stayed slow, never stayed level, never stayed predictable. The aircraft punished impatience and rewarded restraint. Weiss finally understood the name whispered by enemy pilots, not because of the sound in a dive, but because once it appeared, escape was only an illusion. Searching for flaws. Still, nothing was invincible. He spent the next phase hunting for cracks in the design. At low speeds, the aircraft became reluctant. Control forces increased dramatically. Rolling required effort. In tight, slow exchanges, scissors, snap turns, German fighters still held superiority. If the Corsair ever allowed itself to be dragged into that arena, it would lose. But that "if" was doing a lot of work. A smart pilot would never accept those conditions. The stall. Weiss pulled the nose higher. Speed bled away. The aircraft gave little warning. Then suddenly, violence. One wing dropped sharply. The aircraft snapped over with alarming aggression. He recovered quickly, but the message was unmistakable. This aircraft demanded speed. Lose it, and it punished you. Blind spots. He studied visibility next. The raised cockpit helped, but physics couldn't be cheated. The long nose created a dead zone directly ahead and below. In a sustained turning fight, an experienced German pilot could slide into that blind area and stay there. But again, only if the Corsair allowed it. And it never had to. The dive test one final push. He tipped the nose downward. The horizon vanished. Speed piled on fast. 450, 480. The aircraft shook, but remained obedient. No sudden loss of control. No structural failure. Just raw momentum. This machine trusted its strength, and expected its pilot to trust it too. End of Part 4. Cliffhanger. As Weiss pulled out of the dive and turned back toward base, the conclusion settled heavily in his mind. Yes, the Corsair had weaknesses, but none of them mattered, unless the enemy made a mistake, and well-trained pilots rarely did. The report he was about to write would carry a dangerous truth. This aircraft could be defeated only by forcing it to fight poorly, and it never had to. The report. They didn't want 500 knots. Beyond that, the aircraft stopped feeling like a fighter and began to feel like a falling object with an engine attached. At extreme speed, the controls stiffened brutally. The Corsair wanted to keep going down. Pulling out demanded planning, strength, and restraint. A careless pilot could dive too fast, lock himself into the descent, or black out under crushing G-forces during recovery. It was a limitation, but not a fatal one. Germany's own frontline fighters suffered similar issues, and unlike them, the Corsair didn't need extreme dives to maintain dominance. Its power allowed it to fight smarter, not harder. After 45 minutes, the evaluation was complete. Return to base. Captain Ernst Halder throttled back and began his descent toward the test field. On approach, he weaved gently, compensating for the long nose that swallowed the runway from view. The landing was firm, controlled, uneventful. The ground crew rushed in. No leaks, no structural damage, no stress fractures. The aircraft looked untouched, as if the flight had been nothing more than a demonstration of confidence. Halder didn't linger. He walked straight to the technical office. "The document for 3 hours," he wrote without interruption. Page after page, numbers, graphs, comparisons, no speculation, no embellishment, just facts. The conclusion was unavoidable. This aircraft did not fit into existing Luftwaffe doctrine, because doctrine had been built around aircraft like the Bf-109 and Fw-190. The Corsair belonged to a different philosophy, one based on energy, not turning radius, one that punished reaction instead of provoking it. The most dangerous pages. The final section was the most controversial. Not performance, tactics, recommendations. Avoid engagement whenever possible. Do not pursue vertically. Do not follow into dives. Force low-speed combat only if the enemy commits first. Even with altitude advantage, success was uncertain. The wording was careful, but the meaning was unmistakable. This aircraft could not be reliably defeated. The response. 3 days later, Halder was summoned to Berlin. The room was small, sparse, silent. Across the table sat a general staff officer whose name was never given. The questioning was relentless. Are you certain the engine was operating at standard output? Could the aircraft have been modified for propaganda purposes? Are you aware that this contradicts reports from other theaters? Halder answered calmly. The measurements were real. The behavior was consistent. If anything, the evaluation was incomplete. 45 minutes was not enough to explore the full envelope. The officer listened, then spoke quietly. Denial. Your technical findings are accepted, he said. A pause. But your tactical conclusions go beyond your mandate. Another pause. At this time, we assessed the threat differently. That was it. No counter-arguments, no corrections, just dismissal. Halder understood immediately. This wasn't about aircraft. It was about narrative. The unwritten order. The Luftwaffe could not afford another admission of inferiority. Not now, not after the Mustang, not after the Thunderbolt. Another enemy fighter, superior by design, was unacceptable. So the report would be filed, archived, classified, and quietly ignored. Final thought. The Corsair never appeared over Europe in large numbers. History would later say it was a carrier fighter, a Pacific weapon, unsuited for the skies above Germany. But one German test pilot knew the truth. It wasn't absence that saved the Luftwaffe. It was luck, because had this aircraft arrived in force, there would have been no counter, only silence in the sky. The truth that changed nothing. The Corsair is a naval fighter. It will not appear over Europe in meaningful numbers. The sentence was delivered calmly, almost kindly, and that was the end of the discussion. Major Hans Werner Lerch understood immediately what it meant. His report wasn't being rejected. It was being neutralized, not because it was flawed, but because it was inconvenient. It described a future the Luftwaffe no longer had the strength to face. Buried, not forgotten. Lerch returned to Rechlin and resumed his work as if nothing had happened. New aircraft arrived, new evaluations, new measurements. Over the following months, he tested more captured Allied machines than almost any pilot in Germany. Different nations, different philosophies, same conclusion. Germany was no longer setting the pace, but the Corsair report refused to die. Unofficial copies moved quietly between fighter units. A page here, a summary there. Pilots sharing what command would not say aloud. By the end of 1944, many German pilots knew the Corsair by reputation alone. Its strengths, its limits, its logic. It didn't matter. The aircraft never came. Not in squadrons, not in formations. History would later explain this with logistics and doctrine. Lerch knew the simpler truth. Sometimes survival depends on what your enemy doesn't deploy. By war's end. In April 1945, as Soviet forces closed in on Rechlin, Lerch fled west. He surrendered to American troops without resistance. They didn't treat him as a prisoner for long. His value was obvious. Soon, the roles were reversed. The former Luftwaffe test pilot was now flying German aircraft for the United States, explaining their strengths, their flaws, with the same ruthless honesty he had always applied. After the war, he wrote, not propaganda, not excuses, analysis. His memoir, published a decade later, became required reading for aviation historians. Inside were precise accounts of dozens of aircraft, Allied and Axis alike, and one fighter received special attention, the one that stood apart. In interviews many years later, Lurch was asked a familiar question: which aircraft impressed you the most? He never hesitated. The Corsair. Not because it was perfect, but because it was purposeful. Every design choice served a doctrine. Every compromise supported a tactic. It was an aircraft that demanded discipline and rewarded it absolutely. History agreed. In the Pacific, the Corsair dominated the sky. Its combat record spoke louder than any report ever could. The real lesson. But Lurch's Corsair test revealed something deeper than aerodynamics. It exposed a fatal weakness not in machines, but in institutions. He had delivered clear, accurate intelligence, actionable, measurable, honest. The system chose denial, because adapting would have meant admitting inferiority. And so the truth was filed away. That pattern repeated itself across the German war effort in its final year. Uncomfortable reports labeled defeatist, warnings dismissed as exaggeration, reality replaced by hope. The result was inevitable. Last word. Hans Werner Lurch flew the Corsair once, 45 minutes. That was all it took. He understood what it was, what it could do, and what it meant. He told the truth, and the truth was ignored. He died in 1993, one of the last men alive who had tested both sides of the war from the cockpit. His legacy is simple. Technology matters, doctrine matters, but honesty matters most of all. Because when truth is silenced, defeat is only a matter of time.